My family threw a party the day after my miscarriage. Now, they wonder why I missed my sister's wedding. I thought losing my baby was the hardest thing I'd ever endure. But nothing, and I mean nothing, could have prepared me for the sickening betrayal of my own family celebrating a wedding shower 20 feet from my window, the day after I miscarried. Would you ever forgive something like that? Because for me, that was just the beginning of a nightmare that forced me to redefine what family truly means. My husband, Kyle, and I had been trying for 2 years to have a baby. 2 long, heartbreaking years filled with endless hope and crushing disappointment. 3 rounds of fertility treatments that left me emotionally and physically drained. Then, that glorious day, we finally saw those 2 pink lines. A positive test. We were having a baby. It felt like a miracle. We were so excited, we couldn't keep it to ourselves. At 6 weeks, we spilled the beans to my family. My mom, ever observant, had been asking why I looked so tired at Sunday dinners, so we decided to share our joy. Immediately, my sister, Bethany, made it all about her. Her engagement, which had happened 3 months earlier, was still almost a year away, but she complained we were stealing her thunder. My mom actually suggested we should have waited until after Bethany's wedding to even try getting pregnant. Can you believe it? But still, they acted happy enough. My dad even bought a tiny onesie that said, "Grandpa's fishing buddy," and left it on our doorstep. Everything felt okay. Normal almost. Until that Thursday. I started bleeding at work. The world just stopped. Kyle rushed me to the hospital, but it was already too late. There was nothing they could do. The baby was gone. Our baby. Just gone. From my hospital bed, still reeling, still crying so hard I could barely breathe, I called my mom. The words were a struggle to get out. All I heard was her flat, "Oh, that's really sad, honey." Then she asked, "Will you still be able to make it to Bethy's wedding shower this weekend?" My world fractured a little more. What shower? I managed to choke out. No one had told me. She chirped that they'd just planned it, a surprise. I told her I just lost my baby. And she said, "I know, honey, but life goes on." Life goes on. Kyle took Friday off to stay with me. I couldn't stop crying. Couldn't eat. Could barely drag myself out of bed. My mom called twice that day. Twice. Both times to ask about the shower. Not once, not one single time, did she ask how I was doing. I told her I wasn't coming. Then I just shut off my phone. I couldn't handle it. Saturday morning, Kyle went out for groceries and my pain medication. While he was gone, I heard cars. Lots of cars. Pulling up next door. Our house, the one my grandmother left me, was literally 20 feet from my parents' place. Then music started. Loud music. Laughter. Shouts of congratulations. I looked out the window. Pink and white balloons. A huge bride-to-be banner. At least 30 people, all celebrating. Right there in my parents' backyard. The wedding shower. The wedding shower. In a haze of pain and disbelief, I texted my mom, begging her to turn down the music. I was trying to rest. Her reply zinged back. "You're being selfish. Bethany deserves her special day. You should come over and support your sister instead of sulking." I didn't respond. I just couldn't. The party went on for 6 hours. 6 agonizing hours of noise and celebration just outside my window. At one point, Bethany herself came to my front door, flanked by 2 of her bridesmaids. She knocked until I answered, standing there in my pajamas, eyes swollen and red from endless tears. She handed me a piece of cake. "Mom wanted to make sure you ate something." Then the real kicker. "Since you were too busy to come celebrate with me, the least you could do was not ruin the mood with your negativity." Negativity. She actually used that word to describe my miscarriage. The one that had happened just 2 days ago. Her bridesmaids just stood there nodding along. I slammed the door in her face. Kyle came home to find me a sobbing wreck on the bathroom floor. When he saw the party still raging next door, something snapped. He stormed over there and told them exactly what he thought of them. My dad, my own father, actually said I needed to learn that other people's lives don't stop just because something bad happened to me. Kyle looked them dead in the eye and said we were done. He came back home, his face grim. That night, my mom left 17 voicemails. 17. Screaming that I was dividing the family, that Bethany was crying on her special day. For the next 8 months, I didn't speak to any of them. They texted, they called, they showed up at my door, but I never answered. Mom would leave casseroles on my porch with passive-aggressive notes about just trying to help. Bethany emailed me bridesmaid dress options, even though I had never, ever agreed to be in her wedding. My dad left a letter, guilting me, saying I was breaking my mother's heart by being stubborn. 3 weeks before the wedding, Bethany and my mom ambushed me in the parking lot at work. They cornered me. Bethany demanded I get over myself and be her maid of honor like we always planned. I repeated I never agreed to that. My mom chimed in. The miscarriage was months ago. Holding grudges isn't healthy. Then the words that will haunt me forever. Maybe it was meant to be, because now you can focus on Bethy's wedding without distraction. My blood ran cold. I told them I wasn't coming to the wedding at all. Bethany started screaming that I was jealous and bitter, trying to ruin her life. My mom warned me I'd regret it forever. I just stared at them, my voice steady, and said the only thing I regretted was telling them about my pregnancy in the first place. The day of Bethany's wedding, Kyle and I were on a plane to Hawaii. We used the money we'd saved for baby things and escaped. We needed to heal somewhere far, far, away from my family and their toxic drama. Bethany called me 47 times during her reception. 47. I ignored most of them, too busy standing on a beach in Maui, watching the sunset with Kyle, finally breathing without feeling like someone was sitting on my chest. When we came home, our front porch looked like a wedding graveyard. Wilted pink roses in cheap glass vases, the water murky and brown. White tulle bows drooped from the railing. Little bags of Jordan almonds, some crushed, were scattered across the welcome mat. A framed photo of Bethany and Wyatt cutting their cake leaned against the door. On top of everything, a card in my mother's familiar handwriting. You missed a beautiful day. Your sister looked radiant. Some moments can't be replaced. I picked up a centerpiece, and the roses crumbled to dust in my hand. Petals fell onto the porch like cruel confetti. Kyle came up behind me with our suitcases and froze. He set down the bags and, without a word, pulled out his phone, opening our security camera app. I started shoving the vases and bows and almonds and that stupid photo into a garbage bag. I wanted to smash that picture, but just threw it in. Kyle made a sound, a low guttural noise, and turned his phone toward me. The night vision footage showed my mother's face, timestamped 2:17 a.m. on the night of the wedding. She was carrying a vase of flowers up our steps, placing it carefully, then back for another at 2:23 a.m., the tulle at 2:31, the photo frame at 2:44. Each trip, she took her time, arranging everything just so, stepping back to admire her work before returning for the next item. In one clip, she actually adjusted a bow, making sure it hung at the perfect angle. Kyle and I watched the whole thing in silence. 7 trips, spread over 40 minutes in the middle of the night. She'd either left the reception early or stayed up after everyone else left, just to build this little shrine to our absence on our doorstep. The last clip showed her standing back, nodding to herself, before walking back to her house. Kyle closed the app. We just stood there, looking at the real thing in front of us. I finished filling the garbage bag, tied it shut and hauled it to the curb. Some of the vases clinked, glass broke, but I didn't care. Monday morning, back at work, I tried to act normal. Arabella, a co-worker, came over with 2 coffees. She smiled, asked how Hawaii was. I told her it was good, actually. Really good. I even found myself smiling as I described sea turtles and sunrise hikes. She said I looked different, lighter somehow. I said I felt different, and I meant it. Around 10, my boss, Jasper, messaged me. My stomach plummeted. I instantly thought my family had called him, complained, sabotaged my job. I walked to his office, my mind racing, trying to figure out what I'd say. He closed the door behind me and gestured to a chair. He said he wanted to check in because he'd heard I'd been dealing with a personal loss and wanted to make sure I had everything I needed. He asked if I wanted schedule adjustments, time off, anything. I just stared at him. I had never told him about the miscarriage. He explained Arabella had mentioned months ago I was going through something difficult and asked him to be understanding. She hadn't given details, just asked him to give me space and support. Something in my chest cracked open. Tears welled up, but this time they were tears of gratitude. I thanked him, told him I was doing better, but would let him know if I needed anything. His door was always open, he said. That was it. I walked back to my desk. Arabella looked up and I mouthed, "Thank you." She just nodded, went back to typing like it was nothing, like she hadn't been quietly protecting me this whole time without me even knowing. That evening, I was making dinner when I heard a car door slam. My father, walking up our driveway with a casserole dish and a manila envelope. Kyle, bless his heart, was faster than me. He was at the front door before my dad could even knock. I heard Kyle's voice firm through the door. "We're not ready to talk yet. We need more time." My father said something I couldn't quite make out. Then I heard the mail slot creak open. The envelope dropped onto our floor. His footsteps receded. Kyle picked it up and brought it to the kitchen table. Inside were printed screenshots of Facebook comments. At least 30 pages. I recognized names of aunts, uncles, cousins I hadn't seen in years. My Aunt Diane had written I was always a jealous person, even as a child. My Uncle Rob said I needed to grow up and stop being bitter about my sister's happiness. A second cousin I'd met maybe twice called me toxic. My mom's best friend from church said it was sad when family members couldn't put aside their own problems for one special day. Comment after comment, all about what a terrible person I was for missing my sister's wedding. How selfish, immature, cruel. I flipped through the pages. Not one single comment mentioned a miscarriage. Not one person seemed to know I'd lost a baby. My mother had told everyone a story about me being jealous of Bethany's engagement, causing drama to steal attention. She'd made me the villain, erasing every detail that would explain why I wasn't there. Kyle was already opening Facebook on his phone, jaw tight. "We need to tell everyone the truth," he said, set the record straight. I put my hand over his phone screen. Wait. If we responded to every comment, tried to explain ourselves to all these people, we'd be doing exactly what my mother wanted. She'd set a trap, and we'd walk right into it, spending our energy defending ourselves, getting dragged into arguments with people who had already decided we were wrong. Kyle asked what we should do. Then I said I needed to think about it. I took the envelope to our bedroom and sat on the bed, rereading those hateful comments. These people didn't know me. Half of them hadn't talked to me since I was a kid. They were forming opinions based on my mother's lies, and I realized something profound. I didn't owe them explanations or defenses or anything at all. But I also realized there were people who deserved to know the truth. People who might actually care if they knew what had really happened. I opened Facebook on my laptop and started typing. I wrote that I'd experienced a pregnancy loss at 8 weeks after years of trying to conceive. I wrote that the day after I lost my baby, my family held a party 20 feet from my bedroom window. I wrote that I was focusing on healing and moving forward with people who supported me. I didn't mention the wedding. I didn't mention Bethany's name. I didn't mention my mother or the shower or any of the specific details that would turn it into a fight. I just stated what happened to me and what I needed now. I read it over 3 times, deleted a few sentences that sounded too angry, and posted it before I could change my mind. Within an hour, my phone started buzzing nonstop. Messages from relatives I hadn't heard from in months. My cousin Rachel sent 3 paragraphs apologizing for what she'd written on Facebook. saying she had no idea about the miscarriage. Uncle Rob texted he felt terrible, wished he'd asked questions. My mom's cousin sent a message, shocked no one told her what really happened, promising support if she'd known. More messages kept coming in, one after another, each person expressing surprise that my mother never mentioned I'd lost a baby. Some were genuinely upset they'd been kept in the dark. Others just seemed embarrassed they'd said harsh things without knowing the full story. I sat on the couch, scrolling while Kyle made dinner, glancing over at me, checking to see if I was okay. I honestly didn't know how I felt about any of it. My phone rang. Aunt Diane, my dad's sister, who I'd always been close to. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. She was crying before I even said hello. She was so sorry for believing my mother's version without questioning it. Felt awful for calling me jealous. I asked her what exactly my mother had told everyone. She said the story was that I'd been acting weird and distant ever since Bethany got engaged, that I'd made up some drama to steal attention, that I was bitter about being the older sister who wasn't married first, even though I was already married to Kyle. My aunt said my mother painted the whole thing as me being unable to handle Bethany's happiness, using any excuse to make everything about myself. There was no mention of a pregnancy, no miscarriage, no hospital, none of it, just that I was causing problems because I couldn't stand seeing Bethany get attention. I thanked my aunt for calling for the apology. She asked if I was doing okay. Working on it, I said. Kyle brought me a plate of pasta and sat next to me. I told him what my aunt had said about my mother's story. He shook his head, but didn't look surprised. He said my mother had been controlling the narrative this whole time, and that's why she was so mad about my Facebook post. I had taken away her ability to be the one telling everyone what happened. My phone buzzed again. This time, a text from Bethany. I stared at her name. The message started by saying my Hawaii pictures looked nice, hoped I had a good time. Then it shifted. I can't believe you're trying to make my wedding about you, even after it's over. She accused me of deliberately posting something to make people think badly of her, on what should have been the happiest time of her life, that I was so focused on ruining her marriage before it even started, that I couldn't just be happy for her. The whole text went on for paragraphs, accusing me of being jealous, bitter, trying to destroy her happiness. Not once did she mention the miscarriage. Not once did she ask how I was doing. It was all about how I'd wronged her and damaged her special day. I showed it to Kyle. He read it twice, asked if I was going to respond. No, I said. There was nothing I could say that would make her understand. I was tired of trying to explain myself to people who didn't want to hear it. Kyle agreed, went back to the kitchen. My phone rang again. My dad's number. I let it go to voicemail. I knew it wouldn't be my dad. Sure enough, when I listened, it was my mother's voice, screaming about humiliating the family, how I had no right to air private business on social media, that I was making them all look bad. She ranted for 3 full minutes about loyalty and discretion, how I'd always been dramatic, but this crossed a line, that I owed them all an apology. I deleted the voicemail, and then I blocked my dad's number, and my mom's, and Bethany's. I was done listening to them yell at me. That weekend, Kyle's brother, Travis, showed up at our door with his wife, carrying bags of groceries. Travis said they figured we could use some help with regular stuff, while we were dealing with everything else. His wife started putting things away in our kitchen, while Travis sat down with us. He told me he thought we'd done exactly the right thing by choosing ourselves, by going to Hawaii. That sometimes you have to put your own healing first, even when other people don't understand it. His wife came back and sat next to him, nodding. Then she mentioned she'd had a miscarriage before her first successful pregnancy. She talked about how her family had been so supportive, bringing meals, checking on her, giving her space. That support made all the difference in her healing. Hearing her talk about a family that actually showed up the right way made something click in my head. I'd been so deep in my own situation that I'd started thinking maybe this was just how families handled these things. Maybe I was being too sensitive or expecting too much. But listening to Travis's wife describing her experience made me realize how wrong my family's response had been. Normal families don't throw parties 20 feet from someone who just lost a baby. Normal families don't tell you to get over it so you can focus on someone else's wedding. Normal families don't lie to everyone about what happened to make themselves look better. I started crying, and Travis's wife hugged me tight. She said it was okay to be angry, that I had every right to feel betrayed and hurt. Kyle squeezed my hand. Travis said they were here for whatever we needed. They stayed for another hour, just talking, making us feel less alone. When they left, Travis reminded me, "You have family in us," even if my blood relatives weren't acting like it. The next week, I made an appointment with a therapist named Octavia. She specialized in grief and family problems. I expected to spend most of the first session talking about the miscarriage itself. Instead, I spent almost the whole hour talking about my family's response. The party, the voicemails, the wedding, everything that came after. Octavia listened without interrupting. At the end, she said something that stopped me cold. "You're grieving two separate losses, Laura. The baby you wanted and the family you thought you had." She explained that the second loss was making it harder to process the first one because I couldn't separate them. Every time I tried to grieve the baby, I'd end up thinking about my family, and that would make me angry instead of sad. Every time I tried to deal with my family issues, I'd remember why it all started, pulling me back into the grief for the baby. The two losses were tangled together. I needed to learn how to grieve them separately. Over the next few weeks, I kept seeing Octavia. I started having dreams about the baby, dreams where I was still pregnant or holding a baby that looked like Kyle. I'd wake up crying, and Kyle would hold me while I worked through it. But now I had tools from therapy to help me process the grief instead of just drowning in it. Octavia taught me ways to sit with the sadness without letting it swallow me whole. Kyle and I even started talking about whether we wanted to try getting pregnant again someday. Not making any decisions, just being honest about our fears and hopes. My mother left another voicemail saying Bethany and Wyatt were back from their honeymoon, and they wanted to clear the air that we all needed to sit down and talk through our issues like adults. I listened to the message, then deleted it without responding. I knew any conversation right now would be on their terms, not mine. They'd want me to apologize, admit I was wrong, promise to do better. They'd want me to hear their side without acknowledging mine. I wasn't ready for that. I might never be. For now, I needed to focus on healing myself, not on making them feel better about how they'd treated me. 2 days later, Arabella stopped by my desk with a coffee and a question. "Do you want to come to my book club on Thursday night?" My first instinct was to say no. I hadn't done anything social since the miscarriage. I didn't want to explain myself or pretend to be okay when I wasn't. But Arabella must have seen the hesitation. "Just a casual group," she added. "No pressure. We mostly just talk about books and drink too much caffeine." I told her I'd think about it. She left an invitation on my desk, a little card with the coffee shop address. That evening, I showed Kyle the card. He picked it up, turned it over. "You should go," he said. "It might be good for you, spending time with people who don't know about everything that happened." I argued I didn't know how to talk to people anymore, that I'd just sit there awkwardly. Kyle reminded me I used to love book clubs before we started trying to get pregnant, back when I had time for things besides fertility treatments and doctor appointments. He was right, but I still felt nervous. Thursday came, and I almost didn't go. I sat in my car outside the coffee shop for 10 minutes, watching women greet each other with hugs. They looked comfortable, like they'd known each other forever. I felt like an intruder, but I told Arabella I was coming, and backing out felt worse than going in. I grabbed my purse and walked through the door. The coffee shop smelled like cinnamon and fresh bread. Arabella waved me over to a corner where 6 women sat around 2 tables pushed together, paperback books and coffee cups scattered across the surface. She introduced me to everyone, their names blurred together except for Marina, a third-grade teacher with the warmest smile I'd seen in months. They were discussing a mystery novel, and for the next 2 hours I just listened, occasionally adding my thoughts about plot twists. Nobody asked me personal questions. Nobody wanted to know why I was there. I was just Laura who liked mystery novels and good coffee, not Laura who had a miscarriage or Laura whose family threw a party while she grieved. The conversation eventually shifted. Marina mentioned her family still hadn't forgiven her for not having kids. Another woman, Rachel, said she was estranged from her mother over boundary issues. The conversation became a flood of stories about difficult families. Everyone had a story, some worse than others, but all complicated in ways I understood. I sat there listening and realized I wasn't alone. I wasn't the only one with family problems that didn't fit the happy stories people usually told. When the meeting ended, Marina gave me her number. Text me if you ever want to grab coffee outside of book club. Arabella walked me to my car, asked if I'd come back next time. Yes, I said, without even thinking about it. I drove home, feeling something I hadn't felt in months, a lightness in my chest that made breathing easier. Kyle was watching TV when I walked in. He looked up, saw my face, and asked what happened. I sat down next to him. I think I just made actual friends, I said. Friends who like me for me, not because we share DNA or grew up in the same house. Friends who don't know about the miscarriage or the wedding or any of it, who just know me as Laura from book club, who has opinions about mystery novels. The next day, eating lunch in my car, someone knocked on my window. Bethany, standing there in a sundress, her face tight with anger. My stomach dropped. I considered just driving away, but she was already pulling on my door handle. I unlocked it, not wanting to give her the satisfaction of thinking I was scared. She climbed into the passenger seat without being invited and immediately started talking. She demanded to know why I was telling everyone she was a terrible person when she didn't do anything wrong. I stared at her. What are you talking about? She pulled out her phone, showing me Facebook comments from relatives saying they were disappointed in how she treated me. She accused me of spreading lies, turning the family against her, making myself look like the victim, when really I was just bitter and jealous. I told her I'd never mentioned her name to anyone outside our immediate family. If people are drawing their own conclusions about your character, I said, maybe you should think about why that is, instead of blaming me. She called me a liar, her voice getting louder. She started listing every time she thought I'd wronged her over the past 20 years, going all the way back to middle school grades and high school volleyball. Suddenly, the passenger door opened. Arabella. She stood there, looking between me and Bethany with concern. Is everything okay? She asked, positioning herself between us. Bethany looked at Arabella, then back at me. She seemed to realize she was making a scene in my work parking lot where my coworkers could see. She climbed out of the car, pointed at me through the window. This isn't over. You can't hide from family forever. Then she peeled out of the parking lot, tires squealing. My hands were shaking so hard I couldn't hold my phone. Arabella asked if I wanted to sit in her car. I nodded. Mine suddenly felt contaminated. We walked across the parking lot. She didn't ask questions. She just sat with me while my breathing slowed and my hands stopped trembling. After a few minutes, she just said, I have your back, whatever you need. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table, laptop open, staring at a blank email. Kyle made dinner and brought me a plate, but I couldn't eat. I needed to finish this first. I started typing an email to my parents, Bethany and Wyatt, laying out clear boundaries that should have been obvious, but apparently needed to be spelled out. No unannounced visits to my home or workplace. No third-party messages trying to guilt me into contact. No contact at all until I explicitly said I was ready to talk. I wrote it all out in simple language they couldn't misinterpret or twist around. Then I called Kyle over to read it. He read it twice, then added a line at the end, making it clear these boundaries applied to both of us, that he supported everything I was asking for and would enforce them himself if needed. We both signed it like a formal document, even though it was just an email. Then I moved my cursor to the send button. My finger hovered. I felt terrified and empowered at the same time, like I was about to jump off a cliff, but also finally taking control of when and how I landed. Octavia had told me that setting boundaries would feel uncomfortable because I'd spent my whole life prioritizing other people's feelings over my own needs, that the discomfort was actually a sign I was doing something healthy. I clicked send before I could second-guess myself and watched the email disappear. My inbox dinged almost right away. 10 minutes later, barely. I opened it and saw my mother's name. Her response, already typed and waiting, like she'd been sitting at her computer just hoping I'd give her something to react to. The email started with how Kyle was clearly controlling me and turning me against my own family. How I'd become someone she didn't even know anymore. She wrote that a real daughter would forgive instead of holding on to anger. That family meant letting things go and moving forward together. Every line made my chest tight because she still didn't get it. Still thought this was about me being stubborn instead of them being cruel when I needed them most. My dad's email came next, shorter but worse in its own way. He wrote about how I was breaking my mother's heart with my behavior. How I'd regret pushing them away when they were gone someday. The guilt trip was so obvious, I almost wanted to laugh. Except it still hurt. Still made that small voice in my head whisper that maybe I was being too harsh. But then I remembered the music playing 20 feet from my window while I bled and cried. And the hurt turned back into anger. A solid, steady anger. Bethany's response took longer to arrive, but when it did, the email was massive. She'd written out everything she thought I'd ever done wrong, starting from when we were kids. The better grades, the volleyball team, college, boyfriends, creating this whole narrative where I'd spent our entire lives trying to make her feel bad about herself. The wedding and miscarriage barely got mentioned, except as more proof of my supposed jealousy and bitterness. She ended by saying she was done trying to have a relationship with someone as toxic and selfish as me. I sat there, staring at the screen, thinking how she'd just proved exactly why I needed distance. I printed all 3 emails and brought them to Octavia. She read through each one carefully while I picked at my fingernails, trying not to cry. When she finished, she looked up at me and pointed out something I hadn't quite put together myself yet. None of them actually said sorry for what they did, or even admitted they'd done anything wrong. Every single email was about how my boundaries made them feel, how I was hurting them by protecting myself. Octavia said that was typical of people who couldn't accept responsibility, turning everything around so they became the victims of my reaction instead of the cause of my pain. She suggested I write a letter I'd never send, putting down everything I wanted to say without worrying about their interruptions or twisted logic. That evening, I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop and started typing. I wrote about the baby and the hospital, calling my mom while my world fell apart. I wrote about the music and balloons. Bethany showing up at my door with cake, like that made anything better. I wrote about every casserole and voicemail and guilt trip. The parking lot confrontation. The emails that proved they still didn't understand. Tears ran down my face the whole time, but I kept typing. And when I finally finished, I felt lighter somehow, like I'd been carrying all those words inside me, and they were finally out where I could see them. Kyle found me at the table an hour later. The letter saved on my computer, my eyes read. He read it over my shoulder, then wrapped his arms around me from behind, resting his chin on my head. We stayed like that for a while before he said, maybe we should think about moving away from the house next door to your parents. I'd been thinking the same thing, but hadn't wanted to say it out loud because I loved my grandmother's house. Loved that she'd left it to me. Trusted me with the place she'd lived for 40 years. But Kyle was right. Staying here was making everything harder, keeping us stuck in constant awareness of my family's presence, just 20 feet away. The next weekend, we met with a real estate agent. We looked at houses about 20 minutes from where we lived now. Close enough that our jobs and friends stayed the same. Far enough that my parents couldn't just walk over whenever they felt like it. We looked at 3 different places, and the last one felt right the moment we walked in. It had a small backyard with space for a garden, 3 bedrooms, even though we only needed 2, and a front porch with enough room for chairs where we could sit in the evenings. Looking at it felt different from just surviving each day. Felt like actually planning for something good, instead of just trying to get through the bad. Kyle's brother came over for dinner that week, and we told him about the house. He got excited right away, said he and his wife would help us move whenever we were ready. Then he joked about personally making sure my parents never got our new address. And even though he was trying to be funny, it also felt good knowing Kyle's family actually cared about protecting us. They filled some of the empty space my own family had left. Showed me what support was supposed to look like when people actually loved you instead of just expecting you to fit their idea of family. My aunt called a few days later with an update I didn't ask for about drama at family gatherings. Apparently, some relatives were taking my side after seeing my Facebook post about the miscarriage, while others still believed my mother's version, where I was just jealous and difficult. My aunt said cousins were arguing, and my mom was upset that people were questioning her, like somehow I'd caused problems by telling the truth. She told me she understood if I needed space from everyone, not just my immediate family, because things were messy and complicated now. I thanked her for calling, but told her I needed to focus on my own healing instead of getting pulled into family drama or being asked to fix conflicts I didn't create. She said she got it and promised to respect my boundaries. Wouldn't call with updates anymore unless I specifically asked. After we hung up, I felt relieved. Even well-meaning family members could make things harder by keeping me connected to all the chaos I was trying to escape. The next book club meeting happened at the coffee shop on a rainy Tuesday night. We finished talking about the mystery novel we'd all read, and then Marina turned to me and asked if I'd ever tried yoga. I told her no, I'd thought about it, but never actually went. She said she went to classes on Saturday mornings at a studio near the library, and she thought I might like it because the instructor focused on connecting with your body instead of just the workout part. I hadn't exercised much since the miscarriage because my body felt like this separate thing that had betrayed me, something I couldn't trust anymore. But Marina made it sound gentle and safe. So I told her I'd try it once. She wrote down the address and class time on a napkin and said she'd meet me there. That Saturday morning, I almost didn't go. Kyle had to practically push me out the door, telling me it was just an hour, and I could leave any time if I hated it. The studio was small and warm, with wooden floors and big windows. Marina was already there waiting. The class started with breathing exercises that felt weird at first, but then we moved into poses. The instructor kept talking about honoring your body, listening to what it needs instead of forcing it to do things. About halfway through, something in my chest started feeling tight, and I realized I was fighting back tears. By the time we got to the final relaxation pose, I couldn't hold it in anymore. Tears ran down my face into my hair. I tried to be quiet, but Marina on the mat next to mine definitely noticed. When class ended, she came over and hugged me, not saying anything about the crying. Then she told me that yoga brings up emotions sometimes, that it's normal and actually kind of the point. We went to get coffee after. She didn't make it weird or ask a bunch of questions, just sat with me while I pulled myself together. Kyle and I started looking at houses more seriously after that. The real estate agent showed us 3 different places in one weekend. The last one was a small ranch-style house with a fenced backyard. It had 3 bedrooms, even though we only needed 2, and space in the yard for a garden. Walking through it felt different from the other houses. Felt like somewhere we could actually live instead of just surviving. Kyle kept looking at me to see what I thought, and I kept nodding because I didn't trust myself to talk without crying again. We sat in the car afterward, and I told him I wanted to make an offer. He called the agent right there, and we went back to her office to do the paperwork. 3 days later, she called to say our offer was accepted. Kyle picked me up and spun me around in the kitchen. It felt like the first truly forward-moving decision we'd made since the miscarriage. Like we were actually planning for something good instead of just trying to get through each day. I told Octavia about the new house in our next therapy session. She asked how I felt about leaving my grandmother's house behind. I started to give her some answer about how hard it was because my grandmother left it to me. But then I stopped and really thought about it. I realized I wasn't actually leaving my grandmother behind at all. I was leaving the proximity to people who hurt me, and my grandmother would have supported that completely. She never let anyone treat her badly, never made excuses for people who didn't respect her boundaries. If she were still alive, she probably would have told my parents exactly what she thought of them after that shower. And she definitely would have understood why we needed distance. Octavia smiled when I said that. She told me it sounded like I was honoring my grandmother by taking care of myself the way she would have wanted. My mother somehow found out we were moving. I don't know which family member told her, or if she'd been driving by and saw the for sale sign, but she left a voicemail saying we were running away from our problems. She said distance won't change the fact that we're family, that you can't just move away from your blood relatives and pretend they don't exist. Her voice got higher and tighter as the message went on. She ended it by saying she hoped we were happy making everyone miserable. Kyle was with me when I saw the voicemail notification. He took my phone and deleted it before I could listen to the whole thing. He said I didn't need to hear whatever she had to say. We already knew it would just be more guilt trips and manipulation. We started packing up the house the following week. I was going through boxes in the hall closet when I found it. The onesie my father left on our doorstep. Grandpa's fishing buddy. Still in the plastic bag. Still had the tags on it. I sat down right there on the floor, holding it, and cried. For the baby who would have worn it, and for the grandfather I thought my dad would be. Kyle found me 20 minutes later. He sat down next to me without saying anything at first. Then he gently took the onesie from my hands, looked at it for a long time, before suggesting we bury it in my grandmother's garden, a way of saying goodbye to both the baby and this painful chapter of our lives. We went outside that evening when it was starting to get dark, dug a small hole near the back fence where my grandmother used to grow roses. Kyle placed the onesie in the hole. We both said some words about the baby we'd lost and the life we'd imagined. Then we filled in the dirt and planted a rose bush over the spot. A small, private ceremony just for the two of us. Arabella found out we were moving when I mentioned it at work, and she immediately started planning a party. She called it a new house party instead of a housewarming because she said we needed practical gifts for starting over, not decorative stuff. The book club women all came. They brought things like cleaning supplies, tools, a first aid kit. Marina gave us a set of dish towels she'd made herself. Another woman brought a whole box of light bulbs and batteries because she said those are the things you never think about until you need them. Standing in my living room, surrounded by these women who'd become real friends in just a few months, made me realize I'd built something real with them. Something that felt more like family than my actual family did. They asked about the new house, made plans to visit once we got settled, and nobody mentioned my parents or the drama or anything about what had happened. They just focused on being happy for us and supporting this new start. Moving day arrived on a Saturday morning in early October. Travis showed up at 7 with a truck and 3 of his friends, who all volunteered to help us load everything. We worked for hours, carrying boxes and furniture, and the whole time I could see my parents watching from their window next door. They didn't come outside, didn't offer to help, didn't say anything, just watched us pack up our lives and prepare to leave. Part of me expected my mother to come running out at the last minute to make some dramatic scene, but she never did. When Kyle loaded the last box into the truck, I looked back at their house one more time, and I felt relief. Not guilt. Relief. Travis noticed me looking. He put his hand on my shoulder. "You're doing the right thing," he said. Then he climbed in the truck and led the way to our new house, 20 minutes across town. In our new house, Kyle and I walked through each room, talking about what we wanted it to be. The guest room would be for Travis's family to visit, with a comfortable bed and space for their kids to play. The office would be where we'd both work from home sometimes, with 2 desks facing the window that looked out at the backyard. The kitchen would be where we'd host book club meetings and family dinners with people who actually cared about us. The master bedroom would be our safe space, somewhere we could close the door and shut out the rest of the world when we needed to. Standing in that empty house, talking about the future, felt like breathing properly for the first time in months. Like we'd finally found a place where we could actually heal instead of just existing in survival mode. The next week, I set up my laptop in our home office for my first therapy session in the new house. Octavia's face appeared on the screen, and before I could even say hello, she smiled. "You look different," she said. "You seem lighter somehow, more present in your own body." She asked if I'd noticed the change too. I told her I felt like I could breathe properly for the first time in months, like the weight pressing down on my chest had gotten lighter since we moved. She asked if I was ready to start separating my grief about the miscarriage from everything that happened with my family afterward. I said yes, and I meant it. Over the next several weeks, we worked through all the feelings I'd pushed aside while dealing with my family's actions. I talked about the names Kyle and I had picked out, how we'd argued over whether to find out the gender or wait, the way I'd imagined teaching our kid to ride a bike in my grandmother's driveway. Octavia helped me see that I'd been grieving 2 losses at once and letting my family's behavior overshadow the actual baby I'd lost. She gave me permission to be sad about the pregnancy without connecting it to everything else. And that separation felt like opening a window in a stuffy room. I cried through most of those sessions, but it felt different from before. Cleaner, somehow. Like I was actually processing the loss instead of just drowning in it. Kyle and I started talking about trying again one night while we were unpacking boxes in the kitchen. He asked how I'd feel about getting pregnant again someday. I said I wanted to try, but things would be different this time. We agreed we wouldn't tell anyone until much later. Maybe not until the 2nd trimester, or even after the baby was born. This pregnancy, if it happened, would be ours to protect and experience privately without outside pressure or expectations. No Sunday dinner announcements. No early excitement from people who might not actually support us. Just Kyle and me, and whatever happened next. He held my hand across the kitchen counter and promised we'd do it our way this time. 3 months after moving, I found a letter in our mailbox that had been forwarded from our old address. The return address had Bethany's name on it. My first instinct was to throw it away without opening it. Kyle came home from work and found me standing in the kitchen, staring at the envelope. He suggested I read it with him there for support. So we sat down at the table together and I opened it. Bethany's handwriting covered 2 pages. I had to read it twice to believe what I was seeing. She wrote that she'd been thinking about everything that happened and realized the timing of her shower was hurtful. She said she'd been so focused on her wedding that she didn't stop to think about what I was going through, or how hard it must have been to hear the party from my bedroom. She stopped short of actually apologizing. She used phrases like, "I could have been more considerate," instead of admitting she was wrong. But it was still more acknowledgement than I'd gotten from anyone in my family. She ended by saying she hoped we could talk someday when I was ready. I put the letter down. Kyle asked what I wanted to do about it. I said I didn't know yet, that I needed to process it with Octavia before deciding anything. In my next therapy session, we spent the whole hour talking about whether I wanted any relationship with Bethany and what that would look like if I did. Octavia asked what boundaries would need to exist for me to feel safe having contact with my sister. I realized I wasn't ready yet and might never be. Octavia told me that was completely okay. She said I didn't owe Bethany a response or a relationship just because we shared DNA, that I got to decide what was best for my own healing. I filed the letter away in a drawer and didn't respond. 2 weeks before Christmas, I found a card in our mailbox addressed to both Kyle and me. My mother's handwriting stared back at me from the envelope. My stomach dropped. Someone had given her our new address, despite our requests for privacy. Inside was a generic Christmas card with a photo of Bethany and Wyatt in matching sweaters, smiling at the camera like nothing had ever happened. My mother's message said, "Wishing you peace and joy this holiday season," with both my parents' signatures at the bottom. No acknowledgement of the miscarriage. No mention of the months of silence. No recognition that anything had gone wrong between us. Just a normal Christmas card, like we were a normal family. I showed it to Kyle and waited to feel angry or hurt or betrayed. Instead, I just felt tired. I filed the card away with Bethany's letter and turned my attention to the holiday we were actually planning. Kyle and I were hosting Christmas dinner at our new house for the first time, inviting Travis and his family along with Arabella and a few people from book club. I spent the next week planning the menu and decorating the house, focusing on creating something positive instead of dwelling on my mother's boundary violation. Marina offered to bring dessert, and Arabella volunteered to help me cook. And I realized I was genuinely excited about Christmas for the first time in years. Christmas Eve arrived, and I woke up feeling slightly sick to my stomach. I'd been tired for the past few days and blamed it on all the cooking and cleaning. But something made me dig through the bathroom cabinet for an old pregnancy test I'd bought months ago. I sat on the bathroom floor, waiting for the result, not expecting anything, when 2 pink lines appeared in the little window. Kyle was still asleep in bed. I walked back to the bedroom, holding the test, my hand shaking. I woke him up and showed him the positive test. We just held each other and cried. We were terrified and hopeful at the same time, scared of losing another baby, but wanting so badly to believe this one would be okay. Kyle said this was our secret to protect and cherish, and I agreed. Nobody else needed to know until we were ready to tell them, if we ever were. I kept my therapy appointments throughout those early weeks, even though I wanted to hide under the covers and protect this pregnancy from everything outside our house. Octavia helped me work through the fear that came with every twinge and cramp. Every moment, I checked for bleeding. Every morning, I woke up wondering if the baby was still there. She taught me techniques for staying present instead of jumping ahead to worst-case scenarios. Reminded me that this pregnancy was different from the last one, even though I couldn't know the outcome yet. I told her about the anxiety that woke me up at 3 a.m., how I'd lie there with my hand on my stomach, trying to feel something, anything that would tell me everything was okay. She said fear was normal after loss, but I didn't have to let it control every moment of this experience. I kept my appointments with Octavia every week through the first 3 months, sitting in her office and talking through every worry. She helped me see that my fear of losing this baby made sense after what happened before, but that I couldn't let that fear steal the joy from every moment. At 12 weeks, Kyle and I went in for another ultrasound. We saw the baby moving around on the screen, heart beating strong and steady. The doctor said everything looked perfect and gave us pictures to take home. That night, Kyle suggested we tell Travis and his wife because they'd been so supportive through everything with my family. I agreed, wanting to share this news with people who actually knew how to be happy for us without making it about themselves. We drove over to Travis's house the next evening. I felt nervous walking up to their door, scared that saying the words out loud would somehow jinx things. But when we sat down in their living room and told them I was pregnant again, Travis's wife started crying happy tears and gave me the longest hug. Travis shook Kyle's hand and said he was so glad we were getting this chance, that he'd been hoping for good news for us. They asked how I was feeling, what the doctor said, and promised to be there for whatever we needed. Sitting there with them, I felt grateful to have family who knew how to show up with actual love instead of drama. The following week at book club, I decided to tell those friends, too, because they'd become important to me over the past months. We were sitting around Marina's living room, talking about the current book, when I found a natural pause in the conversation and said I had some news to share. When I told them about the pregnancy, they all cheered and hugged me. But Marina also asked gently how I was feeling, given what happened before. I appreciated that she acknowledged my previous loss instead of pretending it didn't exist. Marina then shared that she'd had 2 miscarriages before she and her husband decided to be child-free. Hearing her talk so openly about it made me feel less alone in my complicated feelings. Another woman mentioned her sister had lost a baby and how hard that was. And suddenly, we were having a real conversation about grief and hope existing together. I left book club that night feeling like I'd found people who understood that being happy about this pregnancy didn't erase the sadness about the baby I lost. That Saturday morning, Kyle and I sat at our kitchen table, drinking coffee and talking about whether we should tell my family about the pregnancy. I'd been thinking about it for days, weighing the options in my head during quiet moments. Kyle said it was completely my choice, but that he wanted to protect this experience from becoming about their feelings or drama. I thought about my mother's response to the miscarriage, how she'd made it about Bethany's shower instead of my grief. I remembered Bethany showing up at my door during the worst moment of my life to lecture me about negativity. The more I thought about it, the clearer my answer became. I told Kyle that if we decided to tell them at all, it wouldn't be until after the baby was born. This pregnancy was ours to protect and cherish, something sacred that I refused to let anyone make about themselves. Kyle reached across the table and squeezed my hand, saying he agreed completely. We'd figure out the rest as we went. At 20 weeks, we went in for the anatomy scan, where they check all the baby's organs and measurements. The tech moved the wand around my belly for what felt like forever, taking pictures and typing notes. Then, she asked if we wanted to know the gender. Both Kyle and I said yes at the same time. She turned the screen toward us and pointed. "You're having a girl," she said. I started crying immediately, thinking about the daughter I'd get to raise and all the things I wanted to teach her. Kyle held my hand and leaned over to kiss my forehead while I cried happy tears. The tech left us alone for a minute, and Kyle whispered that our daughter was lucky to have me as her mom. I looked at him and felt something shift inside me, like maybe I could actually believe that this little girl would grow up knowing her worth, learning to set boundaries, understanding that she didn't have to accept bad treatment from anyone, just because they were family. I put my hand on my belly and made a silent promise to her. I'd be the mother I needed. What would you have done in my place, facing such a cruel betrayal from your own family? Have you ever had to draw such a harsh line to protect your own peace? Tell me what you think. I really want to know.